He was Damian Hawthorne, a titan of industry, whose name was synonymous with power. She was Elara, his beautiful, quiet wife, the perfect accessory to his billion-dollar life. At the city's most prestigious charity gala, in front of everyone who mattered, he didn't just insult her. He annihilated her spirit, calling her his most beautiful and most worthless acquisition. He handed her divorce papers that would leave her with nothing but her shame. What he didn't know, and what the world had forgotten, was that before she was Mrs. Hawthorne, she was E.V. Sterling, a legal phantom, a courtroom legend who had vanished without a trace. They thought they were divorcing a housewife. They were about to face a verdict. The chandeliers of the Grand Astoria ballroom dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a fractured, glittering light over New York's elite. For Elara Hawthorne, the light felt like an interrogation lamp. She stood beside her husband, Damian Hawthorne, a man carved from ambition and arrogance, his smile as sharp and brilliant as the diamond cufflinks on his bespoke Tom Ford suit. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple, he the self-made tech billionaire behind Hawthorne Innovations, she his elegant, enigmatic wife. But inside their palatial Fifth Avenue penthouse, Elara was little more than a ghost, a curator of a life that wasn't her own. She organized the galas, chose the wine, and smiled placidly as Damian held court. Her opinions, once sharp and incisive, had been polished down to smooth, agreeable stones. Tonight was the annual St. Regis Foundation Charity Ball, the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. Elara had planned every detail, from the orchestra playing Vivaldi to the floral arrangements flown in from the Netherlands. Yet she felt like a guest in her own production. "Darling, you look breathtaking," Damian murmured, his hand a possessive weight on the small of her back. The compliment was a performance delivered for the benefit of Councilman Miller, who was approaching them. Elara wore a deep sapphire gown by Oscar de la Renta that matched her eyes, but she felt as if she were wearing a costume. "Damian, another triumph," Miller boomed, shaking Damian's hand. "And Elara, my dear, you've outdone yourself. The very picture of grace." Elara offered a practiced, gentle smile. "Thank you, Councilman. We're so glad you could make it." Damian's thumb pressed into her spine, a subtle signal to remain quiet. He launched into a monologue about his company's latest philanthropic venture, a thinly veiled marketing ploy that had the councilman eating out of his hand. Elara stood a silent, beautiful statue, nodding when appropriate. Later, as the auction began, the real chill set in. Damian had been drinking vintage champagne since they arrived, and his mood had soured. He'd lost a bidding war on a vintage Patek Philippe watch to his old rival Julian Croft. The loss, though trivial, was a public chink in his armor of invincibility, and he needed a target to deflect his frustration. His eyes found Elara. He cornered her near the terrace, his voice a low, venomous hiss shielded from the surrounding guests. "Did you see that Croft, that old money parasite, smirking at me? And you just stood there smiling, that vacant, empty smile." "Damian, it was a charity auction," she whispered, her heart starting to hammer against her ribs. "It's for a good cause. It doesn't matter who won." "It always matters." He snapped, his grip tightening on her arm. "Winning is the only thing that matters. Something a woman who's never worked a real day in her life wouldn't understand." The barb struck home, as it always did. He loved to remind her of her kept status, conveniently forgetting the life she'd left behind for him. Before Damian, she wasn't just Elara. She was someone else entirely. A ghost. The final auction item was a grant to fund a new legal aid wing for a downtown women's shelter. The auctioneer, A bubbly socialite named Beatrice turned the microphone to Damian. "Mr. Hawthorne, as our most generous patron, perhaps a few words to inspire our final push." Damian strode to the stage, basking in the spotlight. He was a master of the crowd. He spoke eloquently about opportunity and second chances. Then his gaze swept the room and landed on Elara. A cruel, predatory smile played on his lips. "You know," he began, his tone shifting from philanthropic to personal, "true charity isn't just about writing checks. It's about lifting people up. Sometimes you invest in someone, hoping they'll blossom into a partner, a true equal." He paused, letting the silence hang. "And sometimes they just remain a beautiful ornament, a lovely decorative piece that you polish and display." A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye in the room was on her. She could feel their pity, their morbid curiosity. Damian continued, his voice dripping with condescending charm. "My wife, Elara, for example, the most beautiful woman in this room. But ask her about contract law, about torts, about the very legal aid we're funding tonight, and she'll give you a blank stare." He chuckled, a sound that grated on her soul. "Her expertise is in floral arrangements, not legal arguments. She's my greatest acquisition, but perhaps my greatest disappointment in the intellectual sense. A perfect reminder that you can't buy substance, but you can at least buy beauty." The silence that followed was deafening. It was a complete and utter assassination of her character, delivered with a smile on the grandest stage in the city. He had stripped her naked, not of her clothes, but of her dignity. The pitying looks now turned to smirks. She was no longer a person. She was the punchline to her husband's cruel joke. Without a word, her body moving on autopilot, Elara turned and walked out of the ballroom. She didn't run. Her steps were measured, her back ramrod straight, a final desperate performance of composure. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her retreating form. When the doorman held the door of the Rolls-Royce for her, she didn't get in. She walked past the line of luxury cars, her sapphire gown shimmering under the streetlights, and hailed a yellow taxi. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she could never go back. The taxi ride was a blur of neon and concrete, a smear of a city that suddenly felt alien and hostile. Elara directed the driver to a modest hotel in the West Village, a place so far removed from her Fifth Avenue life that she felt she might as well be on another planet. She paid in cash, a roll of emergency bills she'd kept hidden for years, a relic from a past life where she'd understood the importance of an escape plan. In the sterile, impersonal hotel room, she finally let go. The sobs were ragged, violent things torn from a place deep inside her that had been silent for a decade. The humiliation was a physical pain, a hot brand on her skin. He hadn't just insulted her, he had erased her. He had taken her sacrifice, the career she'd abandoned, the name she'd given up, and twisted it into a narrative of her being vapid and worthless. She had met Damian when she was 27, a rising star in the legal world, known by a different name. She was tired, burned out from the relentless pressure of corporate law. He was dazzling, a force of nature, who promised her the world, a life where she would never have to fight again. He'd asked her to leave her demanding career, to build a home with him, to be his partner in life, if not in business. She, naively in love, had agreed. The condition was that her past life, her formidable reputation, was to be buried. He wanted a wife, not a competitor. The sun was a dirty grey smear in the sky when a sharp knock came at her door. Her heart leaped into her throat. Had he found her? She opened it to find a slick, stone-faced man in a suit she didn't recognize. He held out a thick leather folio. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm a courier from Thorne and Associates. I was instructed to deliver this to you personally." Her hands trembled as she took the folio. Thorne and Associates. Marcus Thorne was Damian's lawyer, a man known as the Shark, a ruthless litigator who took no prisoners. Inside was not an apology. It was a declaration of war. Divorce papers. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her breath catching in her chest. The petition was brutal. Damian cited irreconcilable differences, painting her as an emotionally unstable and frivolous spouse. But the real blow was the settlement offer. It was attached to a prenuptial agreement she'd signed in a haze of love and trust 10 years ago. The prenup which his lawyers had drafted and hers had barely glanced at was an ironclad fortress. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, she would receive a one-time payment of $1 million, a pittance compared to his multi-billion-dollar empire, an amount calculated to be an insult. Furthermore, it included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would gag her from ever speaking about their life together, his business, or the divorce itself. He was not just divorcing her. He was buying her silence and erasing her from his history. Her phone buzzed. A text from Damian. "Sign the papers, Elara. Take the money and disappear quietly. Don't make this messy. You have no idea what you'd be up against." A second text followed this one, a picture. It was of Damian in their penthouse, his arm around a stunning raven-haired woman. Isabella Rossi, a socialite and so-called art consultant, Elara had always been suspicious of. They were both smiling, raising champagne glasses in a toast. The picture was a final, deliberate twist of the knife. Something inside Elara, something that had been dormant for a decade, snapped. The grief and humiliation began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear rage. He thought she was a decorative piece, an intellectual disappointment, a vacant smile. He had forgotten who she was. It was time to remind him. She scrolled through her contacts past the florists, caterers, and socialites to a number she hadn't called in 10 years, a name from a lifetime ago. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Professor Finch," she said, her own voice sounding foreign, a ghost of a former self. There was a pause on the other end. "Who is this?" She took a deep breath, the air in the cheap hotel room suddenly feeling charged with electricity. She shed the name Hawthorne like a snake sheds its skin. "Alistair," she said, her voice dropping, finding its old cadence, its old authority. "It's E.V. Sterling. I need to reactivate my bar license, and I'm going to need access to the old library. I'm being divorced." There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a low chuckle that held a decade of waiting. "E.V." Professor Alistair Finch said, the warmth spreading through his voice. "My God, I've been wondering when you'd call. Welcome back. What son of a bitch do we get to ruin?" The Columbia Law Library was exactly as she remembered it, a cathedral of knowledge smelling of old paper leather and quiet ambition. For 10 years, Elara's world had been filled with the scents of Chanel Numum, 5 and fresh-cut peonies. This smell, the smell of precedent and principle, felt more like home than her Fifth Avenue penthouse ever had. Alistair Finch met her in the archives. He was older, his hair a shock of white, and his face a road map of intellectual battles. But his eyes held the same fiery intelligence she remembered. He was her mentor, the man who had seen the raw, unbridled legal talent in a nervous first-year student and forged it into a weapon. "Evie," he said, pulling her into a hug that felt like an anchor. "Look at you. You look like a stranger." "I feel like one," she admitted, her voice raw. "Alistair, I'm so far behind. A decade is a lifetime in law." "Nonsense," he scoffed, leading her to a secluded carrel he'd reserved. "It's like riding a bicycle, a particularly vicious, complicated bicycle. The principles are the same. Men are still greedy corporations, still lie, and the truth is still buried under a mountain of paperwork. You were the best I ever saw at digging." He had brought her a care package the last 10 years of the New York State Bar Review. A laptop preloaded with access to LexisNexis and a thermos of brutally strong coffee. For the next 3 weeks, that carrel became her entire world. The soft, demure Elara Hawthorne was shed layer by layer. She devoured case law, relearned procedural changes, and felt the old, forgotten pathways in her brain light up. The muscle memory was still there. The killer instinct, dormant for so long, began to stir. Reactivating her license under the name E.V. Sterling was a deliberate choice. Elara Vance Hawthorne was the name on the divorce petition, the name of the humiliated wife. E.V. Sterling was a name that had once struck fear into the hearts of New York's top litigators. In her brief but meteoric 3-year career before she met Damian E.V., Sterling had earned a reputation as a ghost. She was known for her photographic memory, her uncanny ability to find the single fatal flaw in an opponent's case, and her quiet, devastating courtroom presence. She never raised her voice. She dismantled arguments with surgical precision. Then, at the height of her promise, she had simply vanished. While she studied, a second set of papers arrived from Marcus Thorne. It was a formal settlement offer, accompanied by a condescending letter. "Mrs. Hawthorne," it began. "My client, Mr. Damian Hawthorne, is a reasonable man. He is offering you this settlement out of the goodness of his heart, in recognition of the years you spent as his wife. I urge you to accept it. To contest this matter would be unwise. You are ill-equipped for such a fight. Do not mistake my client's generosity for weakness. Take the money and begin your new life." Elara read the letter, a slow, cold smile spreading across her face. Ill-equipped. She pinned the letter to the corkboard in her carrel. It would be her fuel. With Alistair's help, she began her own preliminary investigation. Damian believed his finances were an impenetrable fortress, a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and clever accounting. He assumed she knew nothing, that she had been content to simply spend his money without ever wondering where it came from. He was wrong. For 10 years, Elara had signed his tax returns. She had sat through mind-numbingly boring dinners with his accountants and offshore bankers. She hadn't been listening as a wife. She'd been listening as a lawyer, a habit she could never fully break. Names, dates, and figures she hadn't even realized she was retaining were stored away in the vast, organized filing cabinet of her mind. She started with a name she remembered from a hushed conversation at a dinner party years ago: Silver Arc Holdings. Damian had dismissed it as a minor real estate venture. But as Elara dug through public records and corporate filings, a pattern emerged. Silver Arc wasn't just a side project. It was the central hub, a Delaware-based shell company, through which nearly all of Hawthorne Innovation's most profitable and most questionable assets were being funneled. It was a classic asset-hiding scheme, designed to keep wealth off the official books and away from taxes investors, and in this case a divorcing spouse. "He's not just hiding marital assets, Alistair," she said, one late night, pointing to a complex flow chart she'd drawn on a whiteboard. "I think this is bigger. Look at these transfers. They correspond with dates just before quarterly earnings reports. He's artificially inflating Hawthorne Innovations' profits by shuffling money from Silver Arc, then moving it back out. This looks like securities fraud." Alistair looked at the board, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Good Lord, Evie. If you're right, this isn't just a divorce. This is a criminal conspiracy, and he's put Isabella Rossi on the board of 3 of these subsidiary companies. He's made his mistress a co-conspirator." The final piece of the puzzle was the prenup. Damian and Thorne were relying on it as their primary weapon. Elara read it again, not as the love-struck girl who had signed it, but as Evie Sterling. She spent 2 full days dissecting its 40 pages, and then she found it. A tiny flaw, a single ambiguous clause in Section 9, subsection C regarding the disclosure of financial assets. It was a standard clause, but it was worded just vaguely enough. The validity of the entire agreement rested on the assumption of full and frank financial disclosure at the time of signing. "He didn't disclose Silver Arc Holdings when we signed the prenup," she whispered, her heart pounding. "He listed his assets as his Hawthorne Innovations shares and our real estate. He never mentioned the shell company that held the real wealth." The prenup wasn't just unfair, it was fraudulent. She looked at Thorne's condescending letter still pinned to her board. Ill-equipped, she picked up her phone and made a call, not to a lawyer, but to the court clerk. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'd like to file a motion to appear pro se in the matter of Hawthorne v. Hawthorne, and I will be filing a counterpetition immediately." Pro se, she would represent herself. Damian and Marcus Thorne were expecting to fight a bewildered housewife with a third-rate attorney. They had no idea they were about to step into the ring with a ghost. The preliminary hearing was set in the New York County Supreme Court, a grand, intimidating building designed to make ordinary people feel small. That was precisely Damian's intention. He arrived flanked by a team of 3 lawyers from Thorne and Associates, led by Marcus Thorne himself. Damian looked impeccable in a charcoal Brioni suit, projecting an aura of bored, untouchable power. Isabella Rossi was with him, clinging to his arm, her expression a mixture of triumph and disdain as she scanned the courtroom for Elara. They assumed Elara would arrive looking broken, perhaps with a harried, overworked public defender. When she walked in, she was almost unrecognizable. She wore a simple, perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a severe professional chignon. The hesitant, soft-spoken woman was gone. In her place was a figure of calm, focused intensity. She carried a single worn leather briefcase. She took her seat at the respondents' table alone. Damian leaned over to Thorne and whispered something, and both men shared a smug laugh. They saw a woman playing dress-up, a desperate act. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Amelia Davies entered, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, with a reputation for being sharp, fair, and utterly unimpressed by wealth or status. She reviewed the docket. "We are here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of Hawthorne versus Hawthorne. Mr. Thorne, I see you are representing the petitioner, Mr. Damian Hawthorne." "I am, Your Honor," Thorne said, rising smoothly. "And for the respondent, Mrs. Elara Hawthorne." Judge Davies scanned the courtroom. "The court has not received a notice of appearance from counsel. Mrs. Hawthorne, have you retained an attorney?" This was the moment. Elara rose slowly, her movements deliberate. The air in the courtroom crackled with anticipation. Damian looked on with a smirk, expecting tears or a stammered request for a continuance. "Your Honor," Elara said, her voice ringing out clear and steady, filling the cavernous room. "I have not. I will be representing myself." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Thorne's smile tightened. A fool for a client, as the saying went. This would be even easier than he thought. "Very well, Mrs. Hawthorne," the judge said, a hint of caution in her tone. "Proceeding pro se in a matter of this complexity is highly inadvisable. Are you certain you understand the—" "I do, Your Honor." Elara interrupted, her tone respectful but firm. "And I ask that the court record be amended to reflect my full legal name for these proceedings." Judge Davies raised an eyebrow. "Your full legal name?" Elara looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose smug expression was beginning to falter. Then she turned her gaze to Damian, who was frowning in confusion. "Yes, Your Honor," she declared. "Elara Vance Sterling Hawthorne, admitted to the New York State Bar, number 74321, practicing under my professional name E.V. Sterling." Silence. It was absolute. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in courtroom 3B was the faint hum of the overhead lights. Damian's face went white, the blood draining from it, as if he'd seen a ghost. His jaw hung slack with disbelief. Isabella looked back and forth between Damian and Elara, her brow furrowed in confusion. But the most telling reaction came from Marcus Thorne. The shark's carefully constructed composure shattered. His eyes widened, and a flicker of something close to fear passed through them. He knew the name. Every top lawyer in New York from that era knew the name E.V. Sterling. A prodigy, a phantom who had won a series of unwinnable cases and then vanished. He stumbled back a step, catching himself on the table. Judge Davies stared at Elara over the rim of her glasses, her expression shifting from mild concern to intense, focused interest. She motioned to the court clerk. "Clerk, please verify that bar number." The clerk typed furiously. A moment later he looked up, his eyes wide. "It's valid, Your Honor. E.V. Sterling. Active status as of 3 weeks ago. No disciplinary actions. Formerly with Sullivan and Cromwell." The judge leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Well, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice laced with newfound respect for the woman at the respondent's table, "it appears Mrs. Hawthorne is far from ill-equipped. Welcome back to the bar, Miss Sterling." Elara gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you, Your Honor. If I may, I have a preliminary motion I would like to file." Thorne, still reeling, stammered, "Your Honor, we haven't received any notice of this motion. This is improper procedure." "My apologies, Mr. Thorne," Elara said, her voice dripping with cool irony as she walked to his table and placed a thick document in front of him. "The courier must have been delayed. This is a motion to invalidate the prenuptial agreement on the grounds of fraudulent inducement and material misrepresentation." Thorne snatched the document, his hands visibly shaking as he read the first page. "The core of my client's petition rests on the validity of this agreement," Elara continued, addressing the judge, but locking eyes with Damian. "An agreement which is predicated on the full and frank financial disclosure of both parties. However, at the time of signing, Mr. Hawthorne willfully failed to disclose significant assets, specifically his controlling interest in a network of offshore entities beginning with a Delaware corporation named Silver Arc Holdings." She had said the name. Damian flinched as if he'd been struck. "This is baseless," Thorne blustered, finding his voice. "A desperate fishing expedition." "Is it?" Elara countered smoothly. "Then you won't object to my accompanying request for immediate and full discovery of all documents related to Silver Ark Holdings and its 57 subsidiary companies, a list of which I have attached as Exhibit A." She placed another, even thicker document on the judge's bench. Judge Davies looked from the motion to the stunned faces of Damian Hawthorne and his legal team. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been turned upside down by a Richter-scale earthquake. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her tone leaving no room for argument, "I am granting the motion for discovery. You have 30 days to produce all requested documents, and I am setting a date for a hearing on the validity of this prenup. Given these revelations, I suggest you take this matter very seriously." She banged her gavel. "Court is adjourned." As the judge swept out, Damian finally erupted. "What is this? What the hell are you doing, Elara?" he hissed, striding toward her. Elara calmly packed her briefcase, not looking at him. "My name," she said, her voice low and cold, "is Ms. Sterling, and I am divorcing you." She turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving her husband and his high-priced lawyer standing amidst the ruins of their own arrogance. The ghost was back, and she was ready for war. The 30 days that followed were a masterclass in legal obstructionism. Marcus Thorne, having recovered from his initial shock, threw every procedural roadblock he could at Elara. Documents were delivered late, heavily redacted, or inadvertently misfiled. Phone calls went unreturned. It was a classic strategy: bury the opposition in paperwork and bleed them dry of resources and resolve. Thorne was used to fighting underfunded adversaries who would crumble under the pressure. He was not prepared for E.V. Sterling. Elara worked out of a small, borrowed office in the back of Alistair Finch's university department, while Thorne's team of associates billed thousands of dollars an hour. Elara worked alone, fueled by coffee and a righteous fury. She met every one of Thorne's delay tactics with a precise, immaculately drafted motion to compel which she filed herself at the courthouse. She cited precedent so flawlessly that Judge Davies began to rule in her favor almost immediately, often chastising Thorne for his transparent gamesmanship. The documents, when they finally arrived, came in over 100 bankers' boxes, a deliberate attempt to create a needle-in-a-haystack problem. But Damian and Thorne had made another critical miscalculation. They assumed she wouldn't know what to look for. For 10 years, Elara had been the silent observer at the center of Damian's empire. She remembered names of accountants he'd fired, whispered details of deals he'd made, and had a near-perfect recall of dates that corresponded with his business trips to the Cayman Islands. She wasn't just looking for a smoking gun. She knew what the gun looked like and where he was likely to have hidden it. Late one night, surrounded by towers of paper, she found the first thread. It was a wire transfer confirmation from Hawthorne Innovations to Silver Ark Holdings for $50 million coded as a consulting fee. The date was 2 days before a quarterly earnings call, where Damian had announced record-breaking profits, causing the stock to soar. The money she discovered after cross-referencing another box of documents had been transferred back out to another shell company a week later. "He's been doing this for years," she breathed, showing Alistair the evidence. "It's a cycle. He uses his hidden untaxed money from Silver Ark to temporarily inflate his public company's cash flow, driving up the stock price. Then he sells his own shares at the peak before the money is moved back out. It's not just hiding assets from me. It's market manipulation. Securities fraud on a massive scale." She knew she had the fraud, but she needed to make it undeniable. She needed a human source. She needed someone from the inside. Her mind raced back through years of company Christmas parties and tense dinners. Who feared Damian? Who did he discard? The name came to her like a bolt of lightning. Robert Chen. Robert Chen had been Damian's CFO for 15 years. A quiet, meticulous man who had been the architect of Hawthorne's early financial strategies. A year ago, Chen had been abruptly and unceremoniously fired. The official reason was restructuring. The rumor was that he had raised ethical concerns about some of Damian's more aggressive accounting practices. Damian had replaced him with a young sycophantic yes-man. Chen had been forced to sign a draconian NDA and had since disappeared from the financial world. Finding him was difficult. He had moved out of the city. But Elara was relentless. Using a private investigator, a gruff but effective ex-cop, Alistair, named Frank Miller. They tracked him to a small, unassuming house in suburban New Jersey. Elara went alone. She found Robert Chen tending his garden, a man visibly diminished, haunted by what he knew. At first he was terrified. "I can't talk to you," he stammered, refusing to meet her eye. "My NDA. He'll ruin me. What's left of me." "Mr. Chen," Elara said, her voice gentle, not prosecutorial. "I am not here to ruin you. I am here because I believe you are a good man who was forced to do bad things. Damian publicly humiliated me. He is trying to leave me with nothing. But this is bigger than our divorce. He is committing fraud against his investors, his employees, and the public. You know it, and I know it." She looked at his meticulously tended rose bushes. "He thinks of people as assets to be used and discarded. He did it to me, and he did it to you. The NDA you signed is void if it's being used to conceal a criminal enterprise. You have legal protection as a whistleblower." She handed him her card. It didn't say Elara Hawthorne. It said simply E.V. Sterling, attorney at law. Chen stared at the card, then up at her face, truly seeing her for the first time, not as the boss's wife, but as a professional. A glimmer of his old, proud self returned to his eyes. He kept a second ledger. Chen said, his voice barely a whisper. A private one. He called it the shadow log. It detailed every single transfer in and out of the Silver Arc network. He was so arrogant he kept it as a trophy of his own genius. He kept it on a password-protected encrypted hard drive in his office safe. The password. It's the name of the first boat he ever owned, the Triton. It was the final devastating piece of the puzzle, the key to the entire kingdom. Elara immediately filed a new highly specific motion, a request to seize a single encrypted hard drive from the personal safe in Damian Hawthorne's office at Hawthorne Innovations headquarters. Thorne fought it furiously, calling it an outrageous violation of privacy and a spurious fishing expedition. But Elara's motion was so detailed, so precise in its description of the drive and its likely contents without revealing her source, that Judge Davies was convinced. Given the evidence of financial obfuscation already presented by Ms. Sterling, the judge ruled, and the highly specific nature of this request, I find there is sufficient cause. I am signing the order. The drive will be seized by a court-appointed forensic expert, and a mirror image provided to both parties. When the court officer arrived at Damian's gleaming corporate headquarters to execute the order, Damian was reportedly so enraged he smashed a glass sculpture in his office. He knew in that moment that the walls were closing in. He had underestimated the quiet, decorative woman he had cast aside. He had forgotten that a ghost can walk through walls and uncover secrets buried in the deepest, darkest places. The day of the hearing to determine the prenup's validity had become the most anticipated legal drama in New York. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal scholars, and the morbidly curious elite who had witnessed Elara's public humiliation. Damian Hawthorne, accustomed to being the hero of every story, was now the villain in a drama he couldn't control. Marcus Thorne, his arrogance replaced by a tense defensive posture, opened by arguing the prenup was ironclad, signed by 2 consenting adults. He portrayed Elara as a bitter spouse, now launching a scorched earth campaign of revenge. Then it was Elara's turn. She didn't begin with legal arguments. She began with a story. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and measured. 10 years ago I was a lawyer, a good one. I gave up my career, my name, my entire identity based on a promise. The promise of a partnership. This document, she said, holding up the prenup, was presented to me not as a legal contract between adversaries, but as a formality, a gesture of trust, a trust that was predicated on a lie. She called her first and only witness, Damian Hawthorne. As he walked to the stand, Damian shot her a look of pure hatred. He was confident he could outsmart her, that he could spin his way out of any trouble. Elara began gently asking about their life together, his business successes lulling him into a sense of security. He answered with practiced, charming sound bites, painting himself as a generous husband and a brilliant innovator. Then she pivoted. "Mr. Hawthorne, let's talk about Silver Arc Holdings. Can you please tell the court what this company does?" "It's a minor holding company," Damian said dismissively. "Real estate ventures mostly. Diversification." "A minor company." Elara raised an eyebrow. "Is it standard for a minor company to have 57 subsidiaries registered in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Liechtenstein?" Thorne leaped to his feet. "Objection, relevance." "It is highly relevant, Your Honor," Elara countered smoothly. "As it pertains directly to the assets Mr. Hawthorne failed to disclose before the signing of the nuptial agreement." "Overruled," Judge Davies snapped. "Answer the question, Mr. Hawthorne." Damian's composure began to crack. "I employ a complex corporate structure. It's standard for a man in my position." Elara projected a document onto the large courtroom screens. It was a page from the financial disclosure he had provided before their wedding. "This is the list of assets you provided me in 2015. I see Hawthorne Innovations, stock a portfolio with Goldman Sachs, and 3 properties. I do not see Silver Arc Holdings. Why not? It was a nascent entity at the time," he sneered. "Its value was negligible." Negligible. Elara clicked to the next slide. It was a bank statement from a Cayman Islands bank in the name of Silver Arc Holdings. The date was 1 week before they signed the prenup. The balance was over $200 million. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Damian stared at the screen, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. $200 million, Elara said, her voice like ice. "Would you characterize that as negligible, Mr. Hawthorne?" He stammered, speechless. That's a snapshot in time, a temporary cash position." "Let's talk about another snapshot in time," Elara continued, relentless. She projected the wire transfer for $50 million she had discovered. This transfer from Hawthorne Innovations to Silver Arc was coded as a consulting fee. Who was consulting whom? "Mr. Hawthorne, were you paying yourself?" "Objection!" Thorne shouted, desperation in his voice. "This goes beyond the scope of the prenup, Your Honor," Elara stated. "I'm establishing a pattern of deliberate financial concealment that began before the marriage and has continued to this day. A pattern designed to defraud my client, me, as well as his own company's shareholders. This isn't just about the prenup. It's about a decade-long fraud. "I'll allow it," the judge said, now leaning forward, completely engrossed. "Proceed, Miss Sterling." For the next hour, Elara dismantled him. She presented evidence from the encrypted hard drive, the shadow log, which the forensic accountants had cracked. It was a meticulous record of his deceit. She cross-referenced transfers from the log with his stock sales, showing with undeniable clarity how he manipulated his own company's stock price time and time again. Damian devolved from a powerful CEO into a cornered, sweating mess. His answers became clipped evasive. "I don't recall. My accountants handled that. That document could be misinterpreted." The final blow came when Elara turned her attention to Isabella Rossi, who was sitting in the front row looking increasingly horrified. "Mr. Hawthorne, one of the primary subsidiary companies of Silver Arc, is called IR Global Imports. Can you tell the court what IR stands for?" Damian remained silent, glaring at her. "Let me help you," Elara said. "Could it be Isabella Rossi, the woman you appointed to the board of this shell company 3 years ago? The same woman you've been transferring millions of dollars of marital assets to under the guise of art acquisition fees?" Isabella Rossi shot out of her seat, her face a mask of panic, and fled to the courtroom. Elara turned back to her husband, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "You stood on a stage and called me an intellectual disappointment. You mocked me for not understanding the law. But while you were busy building your house of cards, I was the one who saw how it was built, brick by fraudulent brick. You didn't just lie to me, Damian. You lied to everyone. Your entire empire, this image you've so carefully crafted, is nothing but a grand illusion." She looked at the judge. "I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor." Damian Hawthorne stumbled off the witness stand, a completely broken man. He didn't even look at his lawyer. He just stared at the woman at the respondent's table, his wife, the ghost, the architect of his total and complete decimation. The air in courtroom 3B was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. Damian Hawthorne sat rigid at his table, a marble statue of a man, though a fine sheen of sweat on his brow betrayed the terror beneath. Marcus Thorne shuffled papers with trembling hands, the pretense of control long since abandoned. Every eye was on Judge Amelia Davies as she adjusted her glasses and looked down from the bench, not just at the parties involved, but at the entire packed room, as if to make them all witnesses to the justice she was about to dispense. "I have reviewed the evidence presented in this hearing." She began, her voice devoid of warmth, a scalpel ready to make its incision. "And I will be frank. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case that so flagrantly abuses the sanctity of a marital contract and the profound trust it is meant to represent." She looked directly at Damian. "Mr. Hawthorne, the prenuptial agreement you have sought to enforce is not merely a contract. It is a monument to your own deceit. A contract requires a meeting of the minds predicated on honesty and good faith. You presented a version of your financial reality to your prospective wife that was a work of fiction, a deliberate and malicious misrepresentation designed to secure your wealth at the expense of her future." She picked up Elara's motion. "Ms. Sterling has provided this court with irrefutable evidence, your own secret ledgers, Mr. Hawthorne, that you willfully and systematically concealed over $200 million in assets at the time of signing. You did not forget a minor account. You hid an entire shadow empire. Therefore, this court finds the prenuptial agreement to be null and void, invalidated on the grounds of fraudulent inducement. A collective gasp swept the room. Damian visibly flinched, his knuckles white, as he gripped the edge of the table. Consequently, the judge continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation, this court will treat all assets acquired before and during the marriage as part of the total marital estate, given the standard 50% division under New York state law, and taking into punitive consideration Mr. Hawthorne's egregious conduct, his attempts to obstruct discovery, his perjury on the stand, and the sheer scale of his deception which necessitated this protracted and painful process. This court finds that an unequal distribution is warranted. I hereby award Ms. Sterling 60% of the total marital assets. This time the sound was a roar. Journalists scribbled furiously. 60%. It was a headline, a legend. Thorne leaped to his feet. Your Honor, we object. This is a punitive and unprecedented. Sit down, Mr. Thorne. Judge Davies's voice cracked like a whip. What is unprecedented is your client's arrogance. He came into this court believing his wealth could purchase his own reality. He was mistaken. She let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final catastrophic blow. But the dissolution of this marriage is no longer the most significant issue at hand. The evidence brought to light in these proceedings paints a deeply disturbing picture of potential criminal activity far beyond the scope of family law. The shadow log is not just a record of hidden marital assets. It is a roadmap of what appears to be a sophisticated long-term scheme of securities fraud, wire fraud, and market manipulation. Damian made a choking sound, his face the color of ash. This court cannot and will not turn a blind eye. Judge Davies declared, her gaze now fixed on the U.S. seal on the wall behind her. I have a sworn duty to uphold the law, all of it. Therefore, I am referring the entirety of this case file, every exhibit, every transcript, and most especially the court-verified contents of the encrypted hard drive to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York and the Securities and Exchange Commission for immediate and formal criminal investigation. She looked back at Damian, her expression now a mixture of pity and contempt. You came here to win a divorce, Mr. Hawthorne. I suggest you retain a different kind of lawyer. With a final deafening crack of her gavel, she announced, We are adjourned. As the judge swept from the room, Damian Hawthorne finally broke. He didn't shout or rage. He simply folded in on himself, a hollowed-out man, letting out a low, animal sound of pure despair. His vast, glittering world had just been condemned and was burning to the ground around him. Elara felt no surge of victory, no thrill of revenge. She felt a profound quiet and bone-deep sense of release. It was as if the ghost of Elara Hawthorne, the passive, smiling woman in the sapphire dress, had finally peacefully been laid to rest right there in courtroom 3B. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate, and packed her single leather briefcase. She was Evie Sterling now, and her work here was done. She walked out into a blinding wall of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. 100 questions flew at her at once. Mrs. Hawthorne, how does it feel to be one of the richest women in America? Ms. Sterling, was this revenge? What do you have to say to your husband? She ignored the chaotic sea of faces until she found a single steady camera from a local news channel. She paused, and the entire mob fell silent, hanging on her every word. For 10 years, she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying over the city noise, a story was told about me, A story of a woman who was a decorative object, a worthless acquisition. That story was a fiction. Today the court recognized the truth. There is no victory in the truth. There is only finally a foundation to build upon. Thank you. With that, she turned. Alistair Finch was there, his eyes shining with tears of pride. He put a protective arm around her, and together they moved through the parting crowd to a simple black car waiting at the curb. The months that followed were a whirlwind of headlines. Hawthorne Empire in freefall. Damian Hawthorne indicted by grand jury. Isabella Rossi cuts, deal testifies against former lover. The final image the world saw of him was not in a bespoke suit, but in an ill-fitting one, his face unshaven and haunted, being led in handcuffs from his lawyer's office. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of fraud and was sentenced to 10 years in a federal prison. Elara was methodical in dismantling her old life. The Fifth Avenue penthouse and all its contents, the art, the furniture, the couture gowns were sold at auction. She didn't keep a single thing. Every last dollar went into an escrow account, the seed money, for her new life. A year later, the Sterling Foundation for Women's Legal Aid opened its doors. It was not in a gleaming midtown skyscraper, but on the 3rd floor of a brick building in the Bronx. The office was bright, busy, and smelled of strong coffee and determination. Young, passionate lawyers buzzed around their walls covered not with abstract art, but with caseboards filled with the messy, complicated lives of their clients. Evie Sterling sat at a simple desk overlooking a bustling street filled with the sounds of the city. A young woman named Maria sat across from her, twisting a crumpled tissue in her hands. "He drained our joint bank account," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "He told me I'm too stupid to handle money, that I'm nothing without him. He says if I try to leave, he'll make sure I never see my kids again, and that I'll end up on the street. I think I'm starting to believe him." Elara looked at the terrified woman and saw the ghost of herself. She felt the echo of that public humiliation, the sting of being called worthless. She looked out her window down at the real, vibrant, struggling world below, so different from the sterile, silent view of Central Park she once had. She leaned forward, her voice a warm, unbreakable anchor. "Maria, the first and most important thing I need you to know is that you are not stupid, and you are not nothing. You are a survivor. His words are not a reflection of you. They are a confession of his own character. They are the weapons he uses to keep you small, because he is terrified of you standing tall." She slid a fresh box of tissues across the desk. "He is counting on you to believe his fiction. From this moment on, we are going to operate on the truth. We will file an emergency motion to freeze his assets. We will petition for temporary custody and child support. We will build a wall of legal protection around you and your children, so strong he will never get through it. He wants to leave you with nothing. We will show him that you already have everything you need to start over." A single tear rolled down Maria's cheek, but for the first time it was followed by a flicker of hope. You really think we can?" "Evie." Sterling gave her a small, fierce smile. "Maria," she said, her voice filled with the weight of her past and the light of her future. "I know we can. We are not just going to fight him. We are going to build your new life brick by brick on a foundation of truth. Now tell me everything. Let's begin." Elara's story isn't just about a stunning courtroom victory. It's a powerful testament to the strength that lies dormant within all of us. It's about reclaiming a voice that was silenced and an identity that was erased. She was underestimated, ridiculed, and discarded, but she turned her pain into power and her past into her greatest weapon. Her journey from a gilded cage to a hall of justice reminds us that our true worth is never defined by someone else's opinion or their wealth. It's forged in our resilience, our intelligence, and our courage to stand up and fight for our own truth, even when we have to do it alone. Have you ever felt underestimated or had to rediscover a part of yourself you thought was lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and justice resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more stories that empower and inspire. Thank you for listening.